Deja, hi. So great to meet you. I'm Galina Espinoza, the president and editor-in-chief of Rewire News Group. We are thrilled to have you as part of our package today, looking at President Biden's first 100 days. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really grateful to be here.
Well, we're so excited to talk to you because we know that you have been advocating for reproductive rights since you were 14, 15 years old, at a time when most folks are not even aware of these issues. So I think your perspective is a really unique one, and certainly one that will be valuable to our audience. I wanted to first take a step back, though, and think about Inauguration Day back in January. I know that you had previously done some work with Kamala Harris, so I know that you were probably watching it, feeling a lot of feelings. So would love to get your thoughts on Inauguration Day, and as you thought about, all of the possible policy changes the new administration could make, particularly on the issues of reproductive rights and justice. What was going through your mind? What were you feeling?
Yeah. I mean, on a personal level, I was feeling very disappointed that we weren't going to have a normal inauguration, right? One where me and my friends could attend. But I also think, as I sort of zoomed out, right, out of just the event and what it really meant for the country, I was really proud to have been a part of history, right? Electing the first Black woman of color, to the vice presidency. But I also felt a sense that I could dream again. I had been working under the Trump administration pretty much my entire career, right? At this point, I started when I was 15, so just before Trump got into office. And on Inauguration Day, that is pretty much all the change-making environment I knew. And so to think about what we could do, what we could push for, how we could dream and think bigger while we're not playing defense, was really inspiring for me as a young person whose entire career, right, has been characterized by playing defense against these really heinous and cruel policies. So I'll say that for me, my entire experience with Kamala Harris and that team, all the way up until inauguration, has been an education and possibility and dreaming bigger.
Well, let's talk about dreaming bigger, because you have been dreaming big, as you mentioned, since you were 15 years old. That's when you first really came to this advocacy work. Can you talk a little bit about the experience? Because I know there was a specific experience that kind of sparked all of this for you.
Yeah. So I grew up in a house, like so many across this nation, right, that really struggles to cover the bare minimum: rent, food, right? My mom growing up struggled with substance abuse. And by the time I was 15, I moved out of that home, and I experienced what 1 in 30 youth in the US experience, and that's hidden homelessness. So I was bouncing between houses, right? Living with friends. And I eventually began living with my boyfriend at the time and his family. And now I was not even the only one in my friend group for whom this was true. I had other friends who were in similar situations. And when I took my sex education class in Arizona, I remember the teacher scrolling through a PowerPoint about contraception saying, "I don't really have to go through this, your parents will handle it." And sitting there thinking, oh my God, I don't have parents at home. No one is going to teach me this if this person doesn't. And I'm in the unique situation of living with my significant other. And
so probably good information for you to have.
Important info for me, right? Like, I was like, this is necessary. I need this. And so I started getting active. A Planned Parenthood organizer and I got in touch. She really helped me learn the power of my story, and learn the ins and outs of decision making in our school board. And I started showing up to those meetings and standing up at community call. And for the 2 minutes that were mine, I would talk about my experiences. I would share my experiences of homelessness. I would share my experiences in the classroom and as a student. And then I began bringing my friends to do the same. And after 6 months, we won. And it showed me the power in my story and really gave me this lasting commitment to this work. And not only the work of reproductive justice, right, but of empowering other young people to use their voices and their stories to create.
Talk to me about what it was that you won in that moment, and if it is something that you think is replicable across the country, especially under the new administration.
So what we won was a legislative victory. I then sat for a year and a half on a curriculum review board, rewriting this curriculum. And as everyone knows, right, whether it's local politics or national, things end up in committees and they die.
Especially when sex ed is the topic of conversation.
Right. And so, I think what the real win there was showing students that they had a voice, was showing students that they could fight for more, and that fight has continued, right? I've left now. I went on to school in New York at Columbia University, but young people have continued fighting, continued keeping the heat, right? And the curriculum has now, what is in schools has changed to be more comprehensive, to be more inclusive. And so I think what I really won then was a spark, was something that got us started. But as everyone who does change making work knows, this is not a sprint, it's not a marathon, it's a relay race. And I was able to pass that baton off to younger people who were able to keep the work going.
And you've since turned that spark into something called the Gen Z Girl Gang. So talk to me about this organization, what its focus is, and what you're talking about right now with the new administration, where you think the opportunities lie.
Yeah, so Gen Z Girl Gang is a community of young women and femmes who are working to redefine sisterhood and use social media as a community building tool. And it was really born out of my experience moving from Tucson, Arizona to New York and looking around me and saying, oh my God, I'm a community organizer. And I'd always defined community as the people that lived around me. But let me tell you, the person that lives in the dorm next door does not share my experiences. So how am I finding my community? I'm finding it online. And that's true for so many young people. And so what Gen Z Girl Gang really strives to do is create a culture where we put collaboration over competition, so that way young women and femmes can be the leaders of today, right? Can be at the forefront, because we know that our generation is facing some of the most irreversible and scary issues ever. And we need the perspectives of these young women and femmes at the front, making decisions, leading, not tomorrow, but today. So it's really about empowering young folks to be at the forefront, and creating social mobility through personal networks. But it's also about building strategy and thinking about, how do we use social media as a community building tool? How do we see these followers, right, as relationships? How do we use digital to mobilize relationships? And I'll say that's the other piece, right, is about building this strategy to meet young people where they're at, which is online, and then mobilize those relationships into tangible action.
So thinking about the issues that you talked about, of which there are a multitude, I mean, there is so much work to be done. There's so much damage that I think as a nation, including, and perhaps most especially to our democracy as an institution, that the new administration has to grapple with. But we want to look through the lens of our issues of reproductive and sexual health rights and justice. And, thinking about your digital community and your classmates, if you could, what are you talking about when it comes to these issues? What is important to you? What do you think is missing from policy right now?
Now, what I think is missing from policy is a human aspect, right? We talk about the difference between what it is to have legal rights and have access. And as someone who has been denied access to things like birth control, right? I know how important it is to meet people where they're at. And so I think what's really missing from policy is this human aspect. I think the way that we can bring that human aspect in, the realities of daily life, is by incorporating people with lived experience into leadership positions, right? That means young people, that means women of color, that means women with untraditional leadership experiences, that means community organizers. And we need to be bringing those people into the room, into the conversation, because they know the landscape, they know the experience. And frankly, the people most affected should always be at the forefront of this movement.
And so thinking about President Biden and the cabinet that he's built and the judicial nominees that he's made, do you feel like he is engaging enough on these issues with the right people?
I will say that there's an unprecedented amount of diversity here, right? Diversity in so many different forms. And I think that's incredibly important. It's a really important step forward. One place where I would like to see more progress is including young people. I think there's still absolutely an idea that young people are not qualified, that young people don't have enough experience. And I don't think that that's true. I think young people have just the experience that we need in these rooms, lived experience and experience on the digital forefront, right? Knowing what's cutting edge, knowing how these strategies are evolving and changing day to day, and how to reach other young people. Young people are incredibly important when we're thinking about, reproductive justice and this landscape. We have to be engaging with young people. And I think they need to be in the room, not only as implementers, right, on the ground, but as our strategists, as the people writing the messages, as the people forming policy.
So you called out President Biden for his diversity, giving him credit there. Are there other things you'd like to give him credit for? Other steps that you've seen him take on these issues and in these spaces that you feel encouraged by, even if it's not fully there, but that you say like, okay, this is a change in the right direction?
Right. So I think we've seen a change on the global gag rule, which is amazing. But we definitely need to be talking about this domestic gag rule, Title 10, right? This is the policy I was fighting for when I was 16 and I went viral for a confrontation with my then Senator Jeff Flake. And I asked why he, as a white man, would vote against my access to birth control. And he told me, I support policies that support the American dream, but I know that birth control is a part of that social mobility that has characterized the American dream, right? That has allowed me to go on to be the first in my family to attend university and to go to Columbia University, an Ivy League on a full ride at that, right? And so I think when I think about we're headed in the right direction, yes, but we need to get there faster because there are Dejas who are 15 without parents, without insurance, without money right now, and they can't afford to wait. And so I think about that, and I think about the value of people's potential, young people's potential, and that it really isn't just this like political game of pawns, right? Like these are people's lives. This is potential. These are future presidential staffers, right? Like let's talk about it. Their potential needs to be protected today.
Yeah. And you, of course, are one of those who became a future presidential staffer. And you've also talked, I think, fairly seriously about maybe someday running for the highest office yourself. Talk to me about this idea of a Deja presidency. What would you want?
Yeah.
What actions would you want to take to secure reproductive freedom?
Yeah. I not only talk about running for president, I talk about winning. I have every intention to. And I think that that's important because the more I say it, the more I believe it. And the more I believe it, the more other people believe it. And that's really
you got to put it out there. You do.
And I hope that when I say it, I give the permission to some other young woman, person of color, right, to say it to and to mean it. And whether it's presidency or something else, to stand in their ambitions because we need more ambitious people and we need you at the forefront. So I'll say that, but I'll also say that the guiding philosophy for my work has always been to create communities that are characterized by choice, right? I know what it feels like to not have choices or to only have bad choices. And so I think we need to build a world in which we protect people's choice, and not just the choice if and when to have children, right? But the choice to live in communities that are free from gun violence, police brutality, family separation, and that are thriving and have access to the things that they need to reach their full potential. And so a Deja presidency looks like that. It is a world defined by choice, one in which we protect the potential of people and communities. And the way that I think we can move forward with that, right, and this is more a direct call to action for the Biden administration, is we have to make things like abortion accessible, right? We have to repeal the Hyde Amendment. This is for low-income people. This is for people like me, right? I remember the day when I worked at a gas station for 2 years throughout high school. I remember the day when I hid enough money in my savings account that I knew I could afford my own abortion if I needed it, right? And I think that that's so true for so many young people, so many people across this country. Can have a story similar to that or a memory that's sort of tied to this moment. I'll also say that we have to be working, like I said, at restoring Title 10. We have to be making sure that we're protecting people's potential and their access to choice right now, because we're going to miss out on a generation of leaders if we don't. And then lastly, I think we really need to be investing in peer sex education. and peer leadership, because I was the co-founder of the El Rio Reproductive Health Access Project back in my hometown. And what we did was train young people like me, right, who are homeless youth, teen moms, first generation Americans, people of color, right? These folks who often weren't receiving the traditional leadership recognition and like their student council, right? Or on their teams, like sports teams. And we trained them as peer sex educators, got them paid to do that work. And they were the people most affected, and they got to be in charge, they got to lead, and they got to be representatives of the community, right? And so every week now they work in these teen clinics that are completely free, and folks come in, get their birth control, STI testing, PrEP or PEP at absolutely no cost to them. And I think that is a model, a community model that we should all be following and looking to.
I love hearing about your work on the ground, which is obviously so important as we try to shift this narrative. Of course, there are some pretty strong headwinds that kind of work runs into at the state level in terms of policy. And the last few months have been the most active ever in state legislatures when it comes to enacting barriers to abortion care. Yeah. This has been the issue. This and trans kids seem to be the two issues that these Republican-led state legislatures are really using to try to push through terrible, terrible policies. So talk to me a little bit about that tension. There's only so much work you can do on the ground in the face of such egregious policy changes that seem to be being made by a small group of people who are completely removed from the realities of what's happening on the ground. So talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I come from Arizona. We just yesterday had a Senate bill that it was like the forced birth bill, right? I mean, it's completely wild that we're even thinking about this in this big grown year of 2021. But you're absolutely right that so many of these decisions aren't being made on a national level. They are being made by people who are elected in our hometowns, in our cities, in our counties, right? Like these are hyper local decisions in so many ways. And I think there's sort of this perfect storm brewing where people, one, don't understand who's making the decisions and they don't want you to, and two, don't understand the importance of these local elections. So many of us are talking about the presidential election, absolutely important who's representing us at the top of the ticket, but we have to be voting from the top to the bottom every election. And not only that, but then we have to hold these people accountable once they get into office, right? And I think that's sort of the relationship between electoral politics and issue-based, right? It's this constant back and forth of we have to elect the people who are going to listen and then unseat the people who have done us wrong all of the last like 2, 3, 4 years, right? But then when they win, we have to be there to push them to do better. And it's this like real switch, tug of war. And it's a reminder that everyone has a different place in this work too, right? There are people who are gonna run for office. There are people who are working on state and local campaigns. There are people working in nonprofits. There are community organizers. And so many of us have our own talents, our own passions, our own skills, and we need to be applying them differently depending on who we are. And so it's also a reminder that the entire ecosystem of change makers is important.
Yeah. And there's clearly a lot of work ahead, especially when we see what's happening at the state level. Is there anything that you think Biden can do about what's happening at the state level, even if it's a symbolic sort of gesture? Is there any kind of leadership that you would like to see the administration take in reaction to this? I mean, we have seen him certainly weigh in on bills threatening the rights of trans kids. We have seen him weigh in on bills threatening, voter suppression laws. Is there a voice for him to play on this issue?
That's such an interesting question. I hadn't really considered it deeply. I'm not sure I have a great answer for this one, but I would say, yes, absolutely. The messaging that comes out of the White House is influential, right? It's important. I think that the continued work of everyone who works at like a national level to talk about, hey, down ballot candidates need your attention too, right? We need that every election cycle. Mm-hmm. But I also think that there's a lot of funding that's being held at the national level, right, in HHS. And that is important for on the ground work. That's what funds these community programs that are then experimental, that are pilots, that are changing the direction, and that often are filling the gaps in the programs that have been gutted, right, or that have been changed. And so I think there's also the power of put your money where your mouth is. If you mean it, pay it, and start putting that money into the hands of organizers and community activists and community groups that are filling the gaps right now.
Well, for someone who thought they didn't necessarily have a great answer, that was pretty good.
I was thinking on my toes.
Well done. So something we have been thinking a lot about at Rewire News Group is the fact that that President Biden, almost 100 days into his presidency, has yet to say the word abortion. Whenever he has talked about abortion, he has used the framing of pro-choice and right to choose and all of that, but seems to be very uncomfortable with actually saying the word abortion, which is also surprising given that we know his VP has no problem saying the word abortion. So A, just wanted to get your thoughts on that and what might be going on there. And B, is it important for him to say it? Why or why not? And if it is important, how do folks move him to that place?
I will say that I think, having worked in a presidential space, right, knowing what the comms looks like on the inside, I almost doubt that it's Biden who doesn't want to say abortion, and would put money on it that it's probably a well thought out strategic move on the inside, right? And whether that means it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do, I don't know. But I will say that it is probably less about him as an individual and more about us as an electorate. And so maybe it's not about moving Biden to say it, but rather moving the population, moving our entire country, right? Not just our New Yorks and our LAs, but everything in between, toward a more normalized use of or rather moving everything in between the New Yorks and the LAs, right? Toward normalizing abortion, knowing that 1 in 3 women, right? 1 in 3 people are going to experience this, and that every single one of us knows someone who's had an abortion, and that in that sense it truly is normal. And I think once we get there, whether Biden says it or not, I'm not sure, is incredibly important, but I do think it is reflective of a larger issue, that we need to be normalizing abortion stories, knowing someone who loving someone who's had an abortion, right?
Yeah. All right. So thinking about his entire 100 days so far, you're in college. How would you grade him? You're his professor. Yeah.
Oh, geez.
Where does he land for you? It's been really interesting because we've been asking everyone for this series, and the answers have been all over the place. So curious to see: is he closer to a B? Is he in that territory, or is he closer to a D and kind of in trouble of failing?
What class are we in? We're just in the reproductive justice.
We are just exactly.
Okay. Yes, okay. And we're just grading Biden. It's not a group project.
Just the president. Yep. He's the one who's going to be evaluated. That's the marker. A president's first 100 days throughout history. That's always been kind of a defining milestone.
I had my syllabus lined up. I had the requirements.
And that's fair. Very fair of you.
I think he's passing. I'll say I think he's passing. Pass-fail, he's passing. I think I'd give a C+ because, like I said, issues like Title 10 and the Hyde Amendment aren't extras. They're not something to be weighted on. People's potential needs to be protected right now, right? There are Dejas that are 15 waiting for that support right now. And so it's not something that can be put off. It's not something that can be put on the back burner. It has real life implications for people today. And those implications will very much have an effect in 10, 20 years on what our White House looks like, right? On what our elected officials look like, the experiences they've lived. So I'll say, I think I'm giving a C+ because I like the direction we're headed. I think this is more of a progress report And
Fair enough. It's
I
not
don't
a full
know.
semester. So.
Yeah. This is a warning. This is a progress report. This is the midterm. I don't know.
And to move to a higher level, other
Yeah.
than Title 10, anything you'd like to see from him that you think would move him closer to that B safe average kind of area?
Yeah, like I said, I think Title 10 is absolutely one piece. We need to be expanding access to birth control. We also need to be expanding access to abortion. I think two places we can do that: repealing the Hyde Amendment, right? Making sure that low income people have access to the abortions that are legally guaranteed to them. Two, we need to be making more accessible medication abortion. It is no secret that medication abortion is safe and easy. And frankly, it should not be as hard to access as it is. Sort of doubling back to my other piece on birth control access, this is sort of, we'll see if we can get there. But there's no reason we shouldn't be able to access birth control over the counter either. And that is not unrealistic to be thinking about under this administration. There is no reason, there's absolutely no reason I shouldn't be able to walk into my CVS and get that.
I hope we don't have to wait for a Deja presidency for that to happen.
Oh, I that's ridiculous, frankly. That's ridiculous. There's so many places, right, where even I was able to look at, I worked with Planned Parenthood International over the summer, and I was able to look at the work they were doing in their Latin American affiliates and how there were youth peer providers who were able to provide medication abortions. And I was like, this is wild. Like, why are my peer providers not able to do that? They are trained, they're smart, they've been in this space, and it's incredibly safe. And similarly, I remember I studied abroad and was able to see what it actually looks like to be able to get birth control over the counter. And I was like, this is so easy. This is how it should be. And so a reminder that this is not new. This is happening all over the world. And there's great examples of the fact that it is safe and that it increases health outcomes for everybody, and increases choice. So I think we should be thinking about that and really working in increasing accessibility.
Great. Well, Deja, those are all the questions that I wanted to run through with you, but I do always like at the end to give interviewees a chance if there was anything that you wanted to say that I didn't give you a chance to say, or any kind of final thoughts you want to leave folks with. Now is your opportunity, and it's also okay to say like, no, we've covered everything we needed to cover.
I think just two pieces. I really want to stress the youth peer provider model and give a shout out to El Rio Rep. So I might run that once more. And then I also do want to shout out, Kamala Harris and how incredibly proud I am to have like such an openly pro-choice badass woman in the White House. So if I can do a take of that and a take of that, that would be
fantastic. Incredible. Great. So you've talked a lot about the peer provider model. Can you go into more specifics about why you think that's just so key to achieving real progress in the reproductive justice space?
Absolutely. So like I said, I co-founded the El Rio Reproductive Health Access Project when I was still a high schooler, when I was experiencing hidden homelessness. And we trained peer leaders who were often untraditional leaders, right? Teen moms, folks experiencing homelessness, people who had been previously incarcerated or were living in transitional housing, to become peer sex educators in our teen clinics. And they got paid to do it. And they would show up each week, they still do. And the teens that came in received sex education from them, birth control counseling, and then were able to receive birth control, STI testing, PrEP or PEP at absolutely no cost to them. And I think that is the model, right? Because these peer leaders are the people most affected, and their friends are the people most affected. And it's the people that they go to church with. It's the people they're sitting in class with. It's the people they're sitting at the bus stop with who need our services most. And so this model has been incredibly effective. It's a pilot program. I think it's something we should all be looking to. And I think it's incredibly special because it provides both leadership opportunities for the people most affected to become the leaders that we need tomorrow, who are going to be the pro-choice leaders of tomorrow, right? Our elected officials who live in diverse experiences. And it also provides the services that these young people need right now to also take control of their bodies and their futures and become, astronauts or moms or senators or teachers later down the road. And so I'll say that I think this peer provider model is incredibly important and we should all be looking to it.
Well, and I think you're a great example of what happens when we invest in young people in this way. I mean, you most recently worked as a staffer for our current vice president. Would love to hear a little bit about what specifically drew you to Kamala Harris, and what is the three things that you feel that you learned most from her?
Sure. What drew me to her was our similarities. We're both first generation Americans, raised by single moms, women of color. And so for me, this idea of perspective stayed throughout my entire time working with her. And even now, as I watched her be inaugurated, right, to become the first, I recognize how important it is to work in diverse perspectives into our change making work, into the people making the decisions, right, into the people on Capitol Hill and in the White House. We need diverse perspectives, and that's because representation matters. And when I look at her, I see a badass. I see someone who is unapologetic. I see someone who is joyful, and I see someone who has been unabashedly pro-choice. And I know that I can trust her to continue to make those decisions because of her lived experiences, because of the experiences we share. And I think that that is something that I can't say for a lot of representatives, uh, and that we need more representatives who have a stake, who have a personal stake in the work that they're doing in this way.